Christopher Lee, the actor who played Saruman in The Lord of the Rings and Count Dooku in Star Wars, was related to Confederate General Robert E. Lee, was a flight lieutenant in the British Royal Air Force and killed multiple Nazis, climbed Mount Vesuvius 3 days before it erupted, tripped over a live bomb and survived, and released a death metal album at the age of 88. During World War II, French weightlifter Charles Rigoleau was jailed after punching a Nazi guard. He then broke out of the cell by bending the bars, allowed other prisoners to escape with him, and then beat the guard who jailed him. Lachman Gurung was a Gurkha soldier during World War II who once threw back 2 enemy grenades from his trench before the third one exploded in his hand. He then single-handedly defended his post for over 4 hours against 200 Japanese enemies, killing 31 soldiers using only his left hand. He ended up surviving and was awarded the Victoria Cross for his actions, the highest and rarest honor in the British Army. In 2022, DMV rapper Markel Moro, aka Gunu, was shot and killed in Washington, D.C. Days later, his family held a memorial inside a D.C. nightclub where his embalmed body was dressed in designer clothes, propped upright on stage, and displayed while his music played to a crowd. The invite-only event was attended by family, friends, and fans, turning a nightclub into a viewing space and leaving people standing feet away from his real corpse. There's no evidence Gunu ever requested this, making it one of the strangest memorials ever held for a deceased rapper. A baby named Breland was born completely healthy, but just 2 days after birth, she was kissed on the mouth by someone with an active cold sore. Because her immune system was not yet developed, she contracted herpes simplex virus, which spread to her brain and caused HSV encephalitis. The infection led to seizures and permanent brain damage, another case demonstrating why you should be very careful when kissing a baby. In 1925, Ora Ralph Thomas, an Illinois sheriff's deputy during the Prohibition era, was assassinated by members of the KKK. Thomas was the leader of an armed anti-Klan paramilitary group, making him a direct target. When 3 Klansmen ambushed him, Thomas returned fire, shooting and killing all 3 of his attackers before succumbing to his own wounds. Don Rickles passed away before he was able to record any lines for Toy Story 4. But instead of replacing him, Disney reviewed 25 years of material from the first 3 films, video games, and other media. They were able to assemble enough dialogue to cover the entire film. This seal pup was abandoned by her colony because she's ginger. In 1945, a U.S. Air Force bomber accidentally crashed into the Empire State Building due to heavy fog. The accident caused the deaths of 14 people and more than $1 million in damages. Plane parts also severed the cables of an elevator and the woman inside fell for 70 stories. She miraculously lived and still holds the world record for the longest survived elevator fall. During an SAS training exercise in 1996, 21-year-old Bear Grylls broke his back after falling 16,000 feet when his parachute failed to open. His surgeon wasn't sure if Grylls would ever walk again, but the survival expert climbed Mount Everest just 18 months later, becoming the youngest Brit to ever do it. Here's a photo of 13-year-old Barbara Kent and her fellow campers playing in a New Mexico river, just hours before the first atomic bomb was tested 40 miles away from them. Over the next few days, the area was covered in fallout flakes that the campers thought was snow, only it was hot instead of cold. The US government had selected the site for its supposed isolation, but in reality, thousands of people were within a 40-mile radius and weren't evacuated nor warned before the test. Despite being diagnosed with 4 different types of cancers throughout her life, Barbara was the only girl in the above photo who lived past the age of 30, somehow making it to 83. In 2005, an Ethiopian girl was being brutally beaten by 7 men when a pride of lions chased them away. They even stayed with her until help arrived. Some experts say the lions might have spared the girl because her crying sounded like the meowing of lion cubs. Other experts suggest that they were just getting ready to eat her when authorities arrived. About 400 million years ago, before trees dominated the landscape, the earth was covered with giant mushrooms. In 1986, an Indian man set a world record by spending 72 hours in a cage with 72 of the world's most venomous snakes. He was seeking to spread awareness that snakes don't bite unless provoked. He came out of the cage unharmed without a single bite. Daisy Coleman grew up in a family marked by repeated tragedy. In 2009, her father was killed when their car slipped on black ice and plunged into a ravine in Missouri. In 2012, at age 14, Daisy was sexually assaulted while incapacitated and left outside her home in freezing temperatures. Despite hospital records documenting injuries and extreme intoxication, the charges were later dropped, and she was publicly discredited, triggering years of vicious harassment. In 2013, the family's home burned down under mysterious circumstances, and in 2018, Daisy's younger brother Tristan died in a car crash, mirroring their father's death. By 2020, Daisy was struggling with severe PTSD, harassment, a reported stalker, and learning she couldn't have children, a condition doctors said may have been linked to the assault. Under the weight of it all, she took her own life that August at the young age of 23. 4 months later, her mother Melinda also died by suicide. Daisy's story was documented in Audrey and Daisy, released while she was still trying to rebuild her life. The internet went absolutely nuts when archaeologists discovered a 1,500-year-old Mongolian mummy that was wearing boots resembling red Adidas trainers. A 3-year-old British boy playing around with his father's metal detector discovered a 16th century golden pendant, estimated to be worth around $4 million. This is the facial reconstruction of a 9,000-year-old skeleton that was found in a cave in Cheddar, England, and he was nicknamed Cheddar Man. His DNA was tested, and it was concluded that a living relative was teaching history only a half a mile away from the site, linking back 300 generations. In 1998, Dana Carvey underwent open heart surgery to clear a blocked artery, but the surgeon operated on the wrong blood vessel. After spending 6 months recovering from the life-threatening botch, he won a $7.5 million lawsuit against the hospital and donated all of it to charity. In 2015, an Italian grandma accidentally sent 2 adults and 3 children to the hospital after making them hot cocoa that had expired in 1990. Pearl Jam's song Jeremy was based on the real-life classroom suicide of 15-year-old Texas student Jeremy Wade. He was released from a mental hospital once his parents' insurance money ran out, so he brought a revolver to class and shot himself in front of 30 students. In 2013, a collection of files revealed that the US government lobotomized over 2,000 veterans against their will after World War II. They were lobotomized for reasons such as PTSD, depression, schizophrenia, and homosexuality. After an accident at the Tokemura nuclear plant in 1999, nuclear technician Hisashi Ouchi received a fatal dose of radiation. The dose was believed to be nearly equivalent to the energy produced at the hypocenter of the Hiroshima atomic bomb. Ouchi's exposure to the radiation was so severe that his chromosomes were basically melted and his white blood cell count plummeted to near zero. Unfortunately for Ouchi, doctors saw this as an opportunity to see how long they could keep him alive. They gave him revolutionary cancer treatment, as well as many skin grafts and blood transfusions. On the 59th day, he suffered 3 heart attacks in under an hour. The treatment went on and on for 83 days total, until Ouchi finally died from organ failure. Stepan the brown bear was found weak and alone in the woods when he was just 3 months old. But a Russian couple nursed him back to health, and now 25 years later, he still lives with them in their Moscow home. The couple says the 7-foot-tall bear loves people and has never shown signs of aggression. Temperatures get so cold in the winters in Finland that the frost and snow on the trees can make the landscape look like another planet. Both tanks in this photo are filled with water from the same source, but the tank on the right has oysters in it. A single adult oyster can filter as much as 50 gallons of water per day. Researchers have found that cockroach milk can be 4 times as nutritious as cow's milk. They claim that it's a superfood that can act as a fantastic supplement for protein. Scientists believe that it can help in feeding our growing population in the future. This photo taken last month shows 7-year-old Arthur Bittencourt giving a thumbs up while playing in a pile of poisonous limestone powder in Brazil. Just minutes later, Arthur was tragically fighting for his life after accidentally inhaling particles of the toxic substance. He was quickly rushed to the hospital and pronounced dead on arrival. In 2022, Ukrainian woman Irina Filkina had her photo taken after getting a manicure for Valentine's Day. A few weeks later, she was killed by a tank while pushing her bicycle in the town of Buka, and her body was identified by her manicure. This was the chilling moment when a laser pointer was shown on Elijah Clayton during a Madden tournament at a Florida mall in 2018. The shooter had lost a game and refused to shake his opponent's hand before leaving the tournament. He later returned with a handgun and fired into the crowd before turning the gun on himself. He killed 2 people, including Clayton, and injured 10 more.
Bang! Dead. Gone. Why? Because Alexander Devontae Dickey, who was arrested 39 times, 25 felonies, was on the street.
That was the father of 22-year-old Logan Federico, his voice trembling with anger and disbelief over what the justice system allowed to happen to his daughter. Despite nearly 40 arrests and more than 25 felony charges, 30-year-old Alexander Dickey was still walking free when he broke into the South Carolina home where Logan Federico was sleeping. He dragged her naked from her bed in the dark and forced her onto her knees on the floor. With a stolen 12-gauge shotgun pressed to her chest, he pulled the trigger at point-blank range, killing her instantly, execution style. Logan's father said he had to live with the knowledge that his daughter's killer, a man who had cycled in and out of prison dozens of times, should have been locked away permanently long before he was given the chance to carry out such a monstrous act. Iconic actor Jack Nicholson has faced his fair share of legal controversies over the years. In 1996, he reportedly assaulted an unnamed Hollywood socialite at a party and ruptured her breast implants. Then that same year, he allegedly promised a prostitute named Catherine Sheehan $1,000 for sex and then assaulted her when she asked for the money. Sheehan claimed that Nicholson promptly grabbed her by the hair, thumped her head on the floor, and then threw her out of his house. She received a $40,000 settlement, but later argued that this was insufficient to cover her injuries, including brain damage, which she said was actually killing her. In 1849, Henry Box Brown escaped from slavery by shipping himself in a small wooden crate from Virginia to Philadelphia. Despite the instructions on the box of handle with care and this side up, carriers placed the box upside down or handled it roughly several times. 350 miles and 27 brutal hours later, Brown stepped out of the box a free man and went on to become a magician. When later asked why he went to such an extreme to escape slavery, Brown was quoted saying, "If you've ever been deprived of liberty as I was, you cannot realize the power of that hope of freedom." During the Sandy Hook school shooting in 2012, 27-year-old elementary teacher Vicky Soto died a hero while saving her students from the gunman. After hearing gunshots from outside, she quickly hid her first graders in the classroom closet and refused to hide herself. When the shooter came to her room, she told him that her students were in the gym, after which some of the kids ran from their hiding spots in a panic. The shooter opened fire, but Soto shielded the children with her body as they escaped, saving 11 young lives while sacrificing her own. Nicknamed the Saint of Auschwitz, Maximilian Kolbe was a Polish Catholic priest who offered to die in the place of a concentration camp prisoner who was condemned to die of starvation. After surviving for several weeks, Kolbe was eventually killed by an injection of acid. The man he sacrificed himself for lived on for another 50-plus years and dedicated his life to telling Kolbe's story. In 1982, the Pope canonized Kolbe and declared him a martyr of charity. If you were to swim near a pod of narwhals and happen to hear one whistle, it might be the last thing that you ever hear. The sounds that narwhals make are so loud that they're said to be deafening to humans. In 2006, a 38-year-old woman who had been missing for 3 years was found dead in her London home with the TV still running. Cats have contributed to the extinction of at least 63 global vertebrate species. They're often considered to be one of the most environmentally damaging invasive predators on the planet. In 2018, a woman who received a lung transplant went into anaphylactic shock after eating peanuts even though she'd never been allergic before. She later discovered that the boy who gave her the lungs had a peanut allergy and actually died from anaphylactic shock himself. Talented artist Norman Lee worked for Marvel Comics for nearly 20 years until he suddenly disappeared in 2015. He was snorkeling in the Cayman Islands with his wife but never returned ashore and his body was never found. In 1996, 16-year-old Jonathan Capewell died as a result of his obsession to smell good. The teenager covered his entire body in cologne at least twice per day until he eventually died from a heart attack. At the time of his death, Capewell had 10 times the lethal dosage of butane in his blood after the gas built up in his body for several months. In 1974, a group of 6 men entered the hi-fi audio store in Utah and held everyone inside hostage. The hostages were then subjected to brutal torture, including being forced to drink drain cleaner, which left them with horrible burns in their throats and mouths. One of the victims had a ballpoint pen inserted into his ear that was stomped on until it punctured his eardrum and came out his throat. All 5 hostages were later shot in the head, 3 of whom died. 2 of the perpetrators were sentenced to death, while the 3 other men involved were never caught. As a child, Michael's father Joseph would constantly torment him about his appearance, often calling him Fat Nose. Michael went on to have 4 rhinoplasties and was insecure about his appearance for his entire life. According to his former doctor, Conrad Murray, Michael's father chemically castrated him when he was a young boy. He reportedly did this so that Michael would maintain his high-pitched singing voice into adulthood. On one occasion in the 1960s, Joe wanted to teach his kids a lesson about leaving the windows open at night. So when little Michael was asleep, his father climbed through the window wearing a mask and screamed at him. From that point on, Michael would have recurring nightmares about being kidnapped from his bedroom. But the abuse didn't stop there. Joe would also hold onto a belt while the Jackson 5 rehearsed, ready to strike his children if one of them made a mistake. Michael was reportedly so terrified of his father that he would sometimes throw up just from merely being in his presence. He once said he felt the safest while performing on stage since his father wouldn't be able to beat him in front of a crowd. From a very young age, Michael described being forced into long, exhausting rehearsals for hours at a time, completely missing out on a normal childhood. He said watching other kids play from the window while he rehearsed was one of the memories that stayed with him the most. Delphine LaLaurie was a 19th century socialite who lived in New Orleans. She owned many slaves but was known for acting very politely towards them in public. But in 1834, her true evil side was exposed when her house caught on fire. The fire was set by her cook, who was chained to the stove and attempted to burn herself to death. It prompted a group of men to investigate LaLaurie's attic, where they discovered a scene of absolute horror. The room was full of bound slaves who had been tortured so badly that most of the men vomited. Amongst other atrocities, some of the victims were missing their eyes and had their mouths sewn shut. Madame LaLaurie apparently fled the country and lived out the rest of her days in Paris. In 2007, actor Nicolas Cage purchased her former home for $3.5 million. In 2006, comedian Bill Maher sparked backlash after attending a Halloween party dressed as Steve Irwin, wearing a khaki outfit with a fake stingray barbed through his chest just weeks after Irwin's real-life death. Irwin had died that September while filming a documentary when a stingray's barb pierced his heart, making the costume feel especially raw to fans and the public. Maher later defended it as dark humor, arguing that risk comes with working around wild animals, but critics called it disrespectful and too soon, turning the outfit into one of the most controversial celebrity costumes of the era. A 49-year-old man in Romania caused a devastating accident in 2016 while cutting firewood with a neighbor after the two had reportedly been drinking together. Authorities said he mishandled a running chainsaw during what witnesses described as joking around, striking the 53-year-old victim directly in the groin. The man was rushed into emergency surgery with catastrophic injuries, but doctors were unable to save his floppy Johnson. Investigators treated the incident as a reckless accident rather than an intentional attack, a grim reminder of how alcohol and dangerous objects can quickly turn a fun night into a life-altering tragedy. This was the moment a man desperately tried to force his way through a secured airport door after claiming he needed to see his dying father immediately. On January 1st, 2024, 30-year-old Kyler Effinger breached security at Salt Lake City International Airport after forcing his way through an emergency exit and running straight onto the restricted airfield. Effinger had already checked in and had a boarding pass for a flight to Denver, but for reasons that remain unclear, he suddenly bypassed security procedures and ran straight onto the tarmac instead. He told staff he was desperately trying to reach his father, who he believed was dying. Moments later, he ran across the airfield and climbed into the intake of a Delta Airbus A220 engine, while the aircraft was parked on a de-icing pad with the engine still rotating. The spinning turbine quickly pulled him in, killing him almost instantly from catastrophic blunt force injuries. Police later found his mangled body partially inside the engine. Kyler's grieving family later said he'd been experiencing a severe bipolar episode at the time. On December 10, 2021, a violent tornado tore through the Rackley family's home near Caruthersville, Missouri. 9-year-old Ernestine and her sisters huddled with their mother in a windowless bathroom, where their mom snapped a final photo to reassure relatives that they were all in their safe space. But moments later, the twister ripped the house apart and hurled the family into a nearby field. While Ernestine's parents and sisters survived with injuries, the 9-year-old girl was tragically killed. In 1999, Texas man Herschel Rawls went into surgery to have his cancerous bladder removed, but he woke up to an absolute nightmare. Without warning, doctors had also amputated his beef bayonet, claiming that the cancer had spread and that the drastic step was necessary to save his life. But weeks later, pathology tests revealed that the penile tissue they had cut away wasn't cancerous at all. After years of anguish, Rawls sued and in 2003 reached a quiet out-of-court settlement, but was left with the grim reminder of how a single surgical decision can leave a patient permanently mutilated. In February of 2007, over New South Wales, Australia, Polish-German paraglider Eva Wisniewska was sucked into a massive thunderstorm during a routine training flight and carried to nearly 33,000 feet, where temperatures dropped to around negative 50 degrees Celsius and oxygen levels were extremely low. She lost consciousness for about 40 minutes as her paraglider was tossed around inside the storm, yet somehow remained airborne. When the storm weakened, she descended and regained consciousness mid-air, surviving with only frostbite and minor bruising. Another pilot caught in the storm, Hee Zong-pin, was found dead nearly 50 miles away. In 2007 in California, a 23-year-old man crashed into a police vehicle and, fearing arrest, swallowed an absurd amount of methamphetamine he'd been carrying. He fled on foot, was chased across rooftops, and was eventually captured in a highly agitated, delirious state. At the hospital, his core body temperature reached 45 degrees Celsius, the highest ever recorded in a surviving patient with lab-confirmed stimulant overdose. He immediately had to be sedated, intubated, and aggressively cooled with ice packs and fluids as his body began to shut down. Despite the extreme heat and severe toxicity, he miraculously survived after intensive treatment. Denver Airport's Blue Mustang sculpture is nicknamed Blucifer because of its glowing red eyes. Just before it was unveiled in 2006, Blue Mustang's artist died after a 9,000-pound piece of the sculpture fell on him, adding credence to the theories that Blucifer is haunted or cursed. In 1963, 2 criminals in Mexico convinced local villagers that they were prophets and demanded worship and tribute. Prostitute Magdalena Solis was paid to imitate an Incan goddess as part of the scam. Suffering from religious delusion, she started to genuinely believe that she was a goddess. She soon took over the cult and started sacrificing her followers and drinking their blood. Here's an image showing what the sinking of the Titanic would have actually looked like on April 15, 1912. It was a moonless night in the North Atlantic, and once the ship's power failed, the massive liner disappeared into near total darkness, leaving over 1,500 people unable to clearly see the ship, the lifeboats, or even each other. Many survivors later reported hearing screams from the water but couldn't see anything, as the lack of light turned the disaster into something disorienting and almost invisible. It wasn't just the freezing temperatures that made it so horrifying, it was also the darkness, where one of the worst disasters in maritime history unfolded out of sight. In 1922, a young girl with severe diabetes was photographed while essentially waiting to die, at a time when the condition was almost always fatal, especially in children. Before there was any treatment, patients were often placed on near-starvation diets to slow the disease, leaving them dangerously weak while their bodies continued to deteriorate. That same year, doctors administered a new experimental treatment called insulin, one of the first times it had ever been used on a human. Within days, patients who were expected to die began to recover. The discovery transformed diabetes from a death sentence into a manageable condition almost overnight. Pablo Escobar's nephew still lives in one of the drug lord's apartments in Medellin. He recently found $18 million in cash hidden away in a plastic bag behind a wall. He told Colombian media that a vision told him where to look for the cash. A Russian man who tried to rob a hair salon ended up as the victim when the female shop owner overpowered him. She tied him up naked and used him as a sex slave for several days. Peruvian Mayor Jaime Rolando Urbina Torres broke the nationwide lockdown to go drinking with friends. When authorities attempted to apprehend him, the drunken mayor jumped into an empty coffin that was lying near him and pretended to be dead. Human injuries from stingrays are extremely rare and almost never fatal. When Steve Irwin was killed by one in 2006, he was only the second reported stingray fatality in Australia since 1945. It was a total freak accident that he only died from because the barb went directly into his heart. In 1921, spiritualists Thomas Bradford and Ruth Doran wanted to test whether it was possible to communicate with the dead. So naturally, Bradford killed himself via carbon monoxide poisoning and planned to appear in front of Doran as a ghost. He never did. In 2014, scientists found a giant 30,000-year-old virus in Russian permafrost. After thawing out, the virus was still infectious and even began killing amoebas. This raised concerns that melting or drilling into Arctic ice could unleash previously undiscovered pathogenic viruses. Actor David Harbour has been very open about his dark past, particularly his struggles with mental health, alcoholism, and suicidal thoughts. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder at age 25 after a severe manic episode, Harbour was admitted to a mental hospital when he started believing he was receiving divine messages and was possibly the Antichrist. Prior to this, he spent years battling alcohol addiction, which began in his teens and only worsened in college, leading to a life he described as lonely, directionless, and self-destructive. He's admitted to violent emotional outbursts during manic episodes, such as smashing mirrors and feeling like a danger to himself and others. At his lowest, he felt like he was slowly disappearing and contemplated taking his own life. Harbour now credits acting with saving his life since it gave him a way to channel his mental chaos into performance. Now sober and in treatment, he describes himself as someone who enjoys consciousness too much to ever return to his old ways. As a teenager, Euphoria star Angus Cloud survived a life-threatening head injury after falling into a construction site, fracturing his skull and requiring emergency brain surgery, leaving a long scar along his head. He was later discovered on the street with no prior acting experience and cast in Euphoria, where he became known for playing a drug dealer. But in July of 2023 in Oakland, the 25-year-old died from an accidental overdose, including fentanyl, cocaine, methamphetamine, and benzodiazepines, a lethal combination that can quickly lead to respiratory failure. His death came just days after burying his father, who died from cancer, and he had returned to the home where his father passed, reportedly struggling with grief and mental health in the days leading up to his death. Eerily, he previously said he wanted to portray Mac Miller in a biopic, who died in 2018 from a similar fentanyl-related overdose. In 2018 in California, 23-year-old Angela Hernandez drove off a cliff along Highway 1, plunging about 200 feet into the ocean below. The impact left her with a brain hemorrhage, broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and broken collarbones. After regaining consciousness inside the submerged vehicle, she managed to escape before it sank, swim to shore, and climb onto a narrow rocky ledge beneath the cliff. With no supplies and severely injured, she survived for 7 days by drinking fresh water that dripped down from moss and vegetation on the rock face. She was eventually spotted by passing hikers along the roadway, who alerted authorities, leading to her rescue and evacuation to a hospital. Here's an extremely rare encounter with the Tibetan fox, an animal most people don't even know exists. The Tibetan fox is one of the least documented wild candids in the world, native to the high-altitude Tibetan Plateau, where it survives above 12,000 feet in extreme cold and isolation. The fox is instantly recognizable by its unusually square-shaped head, narrow eyes, and thick fur, giving it the appearance of a fox you drew in third-grade art class. Solitary and highly specialized, it relies heavily on plateau pikas for food, tying its survival to a very narrow ecosystem, which makes genuine close-up encounters in the wild highly uncommon. Here's some incredible footage of the oldest person ever captured on film. This is Pope Leo XIII, born in 1810, appearing in an 1898 motion picture at the age of 88. By the time this was filmed, Leo XIII had already been alive for nearly 9 decades. He was born when many people who had fought in the American Revolution were still alive, lived through the reigns of multiple emperors and kings, was already an elderly man during Abraham Lincoln's presidency, and is even older than your mom. Amu Haji, an Iranian hermit dubbed the dirtiest man in the world, avoided bathing for nearly 60 years because he believed cleanliness would make him sick. He lived this way into his 90s, smoking animal dung, eating roadkill, sleeping on the ground, and rarely interacting with others. Then in 2022, villagers finally convinced him to bathe for the first time in decades. Just a few weeks afterward, Haji fell severely ill and died at age 94. Matthew Day Merritt was born without legs and learned to walk on his hands from early childhood. As a young boy, his small size and unusual movements led filmmakers to place him inside the E.T. suit for the movie, where his hand walking gave the alien its unsettling signaling otherworldly motion. In October of 2018, 53-year-old Allison Gibson became trapped in her own bathtub after sitting down to bathe and realizing she could no longer reach the grab bar she would normally pull herself up with. Alone in her home, she remained stuck for 5 days, surviving without food by drinking water directly from the tap. As time passed, she weakened and struggled with exhaustion, alternating the water between hot and cold to stay conscious and hydrated. From October 15th to the 19th, no one noticed she was missing until a mail carrier saw her mail piling up and alerted neighbors. Police were called and she was finally rescued, having narrowly avoided death from dehydration, hypothermia, or exhaustion after nearly a week immobilized in her own bathtub. Here's some extremely rare footage of a giant squid feeding on a much smaller squid. For centuries, giant squid were dismissed as pure myth, nothing more than sailor legends like the Kraken. Their existence wasn't even scientifically accepted until 1857, and humans didn't film one alive in the deep sea until 2012. Even today, they remain among the least observed large animals on Earth. They live thousands of feet below the surface in near total darkness, and almost no one in history has ever seen one actively hunting, let alone captured it on video. Here's an extremely rare compilation of wild animals shedding their antlers. Antlers are one of the fastest growing bones in the animal kingdom, and unlike horns, they're designed to fall off and regrow every year. While antlers are growing, they're covered in a soft, blood-rich skin called velvet that supplies oxygen and nutrients to the developing bone. Once the antlers reach full size, rising testosterone levels cut off that blood supply, the velvet dies, and the animal rubs it off against trees and brush to expose the hardened bone beneath. After mating season ends, hormone levels drop again, the bone weakens at the base, and the entire antler eventually detaches and breaks away. This cycle allows deer, elk, and moose to grow a completely new set of antlers each year, often larger than the last. Sculptor Michael Richards was killed in his art studio on the 92nd floor of the North Tower on 9/11. His art ironically focused on planes, including a sculpture of airplanes piercing a cast of his own body. In 1948, Cecil Harris became pinned under his tractor on his Saskatchewan farm. Fearing he may not survive, he used a pocket knife to scratch his will onto part of the tractor. It said, "In case I die in this mess, I leave all to my wife." Once the man died, the will was cut off the tractor and legally accepted in court. Philip Gale was a computer prodigy who was studying at MIT as a sophomore in 1998. One day he wrote on the chalkboard Newton's equation for how an object accelerates as it falls, along with a sketch of a stick figure tossing a chair. He then signed it "Phil was here" before throwing a chair through the window and jumping to his immediate death. In October of 2011, famed narrator David Attenborough found a skull in the garden of his London property. He immediately informed police, who later determined the skull belonged to the victim of a gruesome murder during the Victorian era. Julia Martha Thomas was killed by her housemaid in 1879 before being chopped up, boiled, and fed to local children. There's a room in the basement of Oregon State Hospital known today as the Room of Forgotten Souls. In 2004, hundreds of copper cans were discovered holding the remains of 3,600 mental patients who were cremated on site starting in 1917. Built in 1628, the Swedish warship Vasa was hailed as the greatest warship ever built, but infamously sank just 20 minutes into its maiden voyage, resulting in the deaths of at least 30 people. After it was salvaged in 1961, archaeologists found that the ship was horribly asymmetrical. Apparently, some of the builders had measured in Swedish feet, which was 12 inches, while others had measured in Amsterdam feet, which was 11 inches. The ship was knocked over by a mild gust of wind less than a mile into its voyage. At his luxurious estate in Puerto Triunfo, Pablo Escobar put together a private zoo filled with giraffes, hippos, elephants, and other animals. Some of the animals, left abandoned upon Escobar's death, have since thrived and reproduced. It is now estimated that more than 60 hippos roam the surrounding areas, and have even become a local invasive species problem. When anglerfish mate, they melt into each other and share their bodies forever. The deep sea is so vast that when a male finds a female, he must latch on and fuse to her, losing his eyes and internal organs until the two fish share a bloodstream. Terry Kath, the original lead singer of the band Chicago, died after accidentally shooting himself in the head. He picked up a 9mm pistol and said, "Don't worry about it. Look, the clip's not even in it." He held the gun to his head, and before pulling the trigger, his final words were, "What do you think I'm gonna do, blow my brains out?" There was a bullet in the chamber and he died instantly. When Pablo Escobar's daughter wanted a unicorn, he bought her a horse and stapled a cone to its head and wings to its back. The horse died a week later due to severe infections. In 1984, a woman started hearing a voice in her head. The voice told her she had a brain tumor, where the tumor was, and how to treat it. Despite no other symptoms, the doctors ordered tests and found the tumor right where the voice said it would be. In Addo Elephant National Park, South Africa, a lioness named Josie went blind around age 12, likely from untreated eye disease such as cataracts or glaucoma. In the wild, that's almost always a death sentence since lionesses rely on vision to hunt and avoid threats. But instead of abandoning her, her 2 adult daughters stayed by her side for the next 5 years. They guided her using contact calls, flanked her while moving so she wouldn't walk into danger, and shared their kills so she could eat despite being unable to hunt. Thanks to her daughters, she survived like this until about age 17, which is already near the upper limit of a wild lion's lifespan. 2008, on a beach in Montauk, Long Island, New York, a bloated, hairless carcass washed ashore with no clear identifying features, quickly dubbed the Montauk Monster. The body was already in an advanced state of decomposition, likely causing the loss of fur and the distorted shape of the head and limbs. As photos spread online, some speculated it was an escaped or discarded experiment from the nearby Plum Island, home to a government animal disease research facility, or something connected to rumored labs in Montauk. Wildlife experts said it was most likely a raccoon or dog altered by decay and water exposure, which can strip fur and change how the skull appears. No official identification was ever confirmed, and the body disappeared shortly after being photographed, leaving the Montauk Monster unresolved and open to speculation. In December of 1988, Hollywood cameraman Bob Samuels, whose credits included Short Circuit, The Color Purple, and Beverly Hills Cop 2, was found shot to death in his Northridge home, killed through a pillow used as a crude silencer. Investigators later accused his estranged wife, Mary Ellen Samuels, of arranging the murder to collect a $500,000 life insurance payout. Afterwards, she was said to have spent lavishly, including a Cancun trip where photos surfaced of her posing nude with large amounts of cash. Prosecutors also alleged that when the hired gunman began cooperating with authorities, she arranged for him to be strangled before he could testify. She was ultimately convicted for her role in the conspiracy and sentenced to life in prison. In August of 1993, 6 Kazakhstani hikers died during a trek through Siberia's Kamar-Daban mountain range. The only survivor later told investigators that members of the group suddenly began screaming, bleeding from their eyes and ears, foaming at the mouth, and clawing at their throats before collapsing one by one on the mountainside. Official reports ultimately ruled most of the deaths as hypothermia, with the group leader reportedly dying from a heart attack. But the survivor's description of the final moments has kept the incident controversial, with theories ranging from altitude sickness and poisoning to extreme weather exposure. Neil Peart, legendary drummer of the band Rush, lived through a series of devastating personal tragedies. In 1997, his 19-year-old daughter Selena died in a single-car accident while driving to college. Less than a year later, his wife Jackie succumbed to cancer, though Peart later described it as dying of a broken heart. To cope with the losses, he took a 55,000-mile motorcycle journey across North and Central America to cope with his grief. Though he eventually returned to music and remarried, Peart later died in 2020 after a private battle with brain cancer. In 1991, 25-year-old Gregory Green stabbed his pregnant wife to death and spent 16 years behind bars for the crime. After his release, he married the daughter of a pastor who helped him earn parole and started a new family in Michigan. But in 2016, history repeated itself in a scene far more horrifying. Green tied up his wife, shot her 2 children from a previous marriage, then poisoned and suffocated their 2 young daughters, ages 4 and 5. When police arrived, they found his children dead and his wife bound and bleeding in the basement. Green calmly surrendered, telling officers, "I just killed my family." He later pled guilty to 4 counts of murder and was sentenced to 100 years in prison, ensuring he'll never get a second chance again. Venus is a 1 in a billion cat whose face is half black and half red tabby. Veterinarians have argued whether Venus is a chimera or if her split face is just pure genetic luck. This octopus had a genetic mutation that gave it 96 tentacles instead of 8. A family of people with blue skin lived in Kentucky for many generations. They were known as the Blue Fugates, or the Blue People of Kentucky. They are thought to have gained their blue skin through a combination of inbreeding and a rare genetic condition known as methemoglobinemia. This video captures the moment a brown bear emerges from its den after nearly 7 months of hibernation, stepping out pale, scruffy, and visibly disoriented after surviving an entire winter without eating, drinking, or going to the bathroom. During hibernation, a bear's heart rate drops dramatically, its body lives off of stored fat, and its muscles barely weaken despite months of total inactivity. When they finally wake up, they can lose up to 40% of their body weight and often look confused and unstable as their organs slowly restart, making this first walk one of its most vulnerable moments of the year. Here's some extremely rare footage of a deep-sea crowned jellyfish filmed by a drone nearly a mile deep underwater, an animal so seldom seen that most records come from a small handful of deep-sea ROV encounters. With its long pointed tentacles and crown-like shape, it looks more like an alien or deep-sea monster than an animal, drifting through complete darkness under immense pressure. Clear footage of such fragile creatures at this depth is considered highly scientifically valuable because they're so rarely seen alive in their natural environment. Real bees were used during the filming of the 90s horror trilogy Candyman. Over the course of the 3 movies, actor Tony Todd got stung 23 times. The producers paid him $1,000 per sting. The gory horror film Cannibal Holocaust was so realistic that the director was charged with murder. Cast and crew members had to appear before an Italian court to prove that the film's special effects were not actual torture. The Nightmare Before Christmas had 24 frames to a second, meaning they had to pose characters 24 times for each second of the movie. In total, the movie consisted of roughly 110,000 frames. Alfred Nobel was known for his 300-plus patents, including dynamite. When Alfred's brother died in 1888, a local newspaper confused him with Alfred and wrote his obituary. It condemned Alfred for his invention of explosives and portrayed him as a horrible person. Alfred, still being alive, decided to leave a better legacy for himself. So in 1895, he set aside the bulk of his estate to establish the Nobel Prize. Knowing he couldn't swim, running back Joe Delaney died while attempting to save 3 children from drowning in 1983. In 1995, a Russian dog survived a car crash that his owners died in. Despite attempts to adopt him, the dog refused to leave the site of the accident. Rain or shine, he waited for them every day until dying 7 years later. The city informally adopted the dog and dedicated a statue to it called Loyalty. In 2022, 2 men sued Universal Studios for $5 million after paying $4 to watch the film yesterday, only to find that Ana de Armas, prominently featured in the trailer, had been cut from the film entirely. They claimed it was false advertising, arguing that the studio sold them a lie. A judge briefly agreed that trailers could legally count as commercial speech, but the case was ultimately dismissed. In 2001, a Hooters waitress named Jody Berry won a company contest promising a new Toyota, but when she was blindfolded to receive her prize, her manager handed her a Toyota doll instead. Berry sued for fraud and won, eventually walking away with a real Toyota car. Alan Heckard filed an $832 million lawsuit against Michael Jordan and Nike, claiming he'd suffered years of emotional pain and unwanted attention because people kept mistaking him for the basketball legend. He eventually dropped the case. In 1996, Denise Rossi won $1.3 million in the lottery, then filed for divorce just 11 days later to keep it from her husband. 2 years later, a stray letter exposed her secret. A judge ruled she'd committed fraud by hiding the winnings and ordered a brutal punishment. She had to give her ex-husband every penny of the $1.3 million she tried to run away with.